The modern world is loud by design. It speaks constantly, not because it has wisdom to offer, but because silence terrifies it. Notifications vibrate, opinions collide, voices compete for dominance. In this endless noise, power is mistaken for volume and presence is confused with performance. Yet beneath the clamor, a deeper truth waits, unchanged by centuries of distraction. The most formidable force has never needed to announce itself. Silence is not emptiness. It is not retreat. It is not the absence of courage. Silence is restraint refined into strength. It is the moment before reaction, where choice becomes possible. The Stoics understood this long before neuroscience gave it language. To pause is to reclaim authorship over the mind. To remain silent is to refuse enslavement to impulse. When you do not rush to speak, something subtle occurs. The nervous system settles. The emotional storm loses momentum. You are no longer dragged by the current of the moment. You stand above it. Marcus Aurelius wrote of the inner citadel, a place no external force could breach unless invited. Silence is the gatekeeper of that citadel. It decides what enters. It decides what leaves. In a world addicted to expression, silence becomes an act of rebellion. It denies the dopamine loop of reaction and reward. It interrupts the reflex to explain, defend, or dominate. Modern neuroscience confirms what ancient philosophy observed through discipline. The pause between stimulus and response is where freedom lives. In that pause, the prefrontal cortex reclaims authority from emotional reactivity. Reason returns to the throne. Those who mistake silence for weakness reveal their own restlessness. They speak to relieve tension, not to convey truth. They fill space because they cannot inhabit it. But the individual who can remain silent under pressure sends a different signal. Calm replaces urgency. Presence replaces noise. Authority emerges without demand. This is why silence changes the atmosphere of a room. It slows others down. It forces attention inward. It creates asymmetry. When you do not rush to reveal your thoughts, you are no longer predictable. You are no longer easy to provoke. You become centered while others remain exposed. Silence, properly understood, is not passive. It is active containment. It is energy held in reserve. It is power that does not leak through words. And like all forms of real power, it requires discipline to sustain. From this stillness, a question rises naturally, uncomfortably, and with precision. If silence is power, why are so few capable of wielding it? Silence, in its truest form, is not the absence of speech. It is the presence of command. The early Stoics understood that the tongue is not merely an instrument of communication, but a mirror of the inner state. When speech is compulsive, the mind is fragmented. When speech is measured, the mind is unified. Zeno taught that philosophy begins not with expression, but with restraint. To speak without necessity is to surrender authorship over one's inner life. Epictetus was even more direct. He warned that most people speak not because wisdom compels them, but because emotion demands release. Anger seeks a mouth. Fear seeks reassurance. Ego seeks validation. Silence interrupts this chain at its origin. To remain silent when provoked is not suppression. It is governance. It is the mind refusing to outsource control to impulse. Modern psychology calls this impulse inhibition. Neuroscience locates it in the dialogue between the emotional centers of the brain and the prefrontal cortex. Philosophy named it long before anatomy could confirm it. The ability to pause before reacting is the foundation of self-mastery. Observe how quickly words appear when inner tension rises. Speech becomes a pressure valve. The untrained mind speaks to escape discomfort. The disciplined mind endures discomfort without discharge. This endurance is not coldness, it is strength held inward rather than scattered outward. Seneca wrote that a person reveals more by what they cannot withhold than by what they express. Speech, when uncontrolled, leaks intention, insecurity, and emotional volatility. Silence seals those leaks. It keeps energy contained. It keeps the inner terrain intact. Those who speak less often think deeper, not because they are superior, but because thinking requires space. Words collapse space. Silence expands it. In that expansion, reflection becomes possible. Patterns emerge, reactions slow. Meaning sharpens. This is why silence feels powerful. It recenters the locus of control. Instead of being pulled outward by stimuli, the individual remains inwardly anchored. Musonius Rufus believed that philosophy was lived more in conduct than in discourse. Silence transforms that belief into daily practice. There is a quiet realization that surfaces here, often unsettling at first. Most people are not speaking because they have something essential to say. They are speaking because they cannot tolerate the tension of not speaking. Silence exposes this truth without accusation. It simply reveals. When you stop feeding the urge to respond, the urge weakens. The nervous system recalibrates. What once felt unbearable becomes manageable. What once demanded expression dissolves on its own. This is not repression, it is refinement. To control the tongue is to command the mind, because speech is the mind in motion. Still the tongue, and the mind follows. Not immediately, not effortlessly, but inevitably. And yet, if silence is a form of inner sovereignty, another question emerges with equal force. Why does stillness unsettle so many minds? Silence unsettles the modern mind because it removes its most reliable escape. When words stop, distraction fades. When distraction fades, awareness sharpens, and awareness, when untrained, feels like exposure. The brain interprets this exposure as threat, not because danger is present, but because avoidance has become habitual. Neuroscience reveals that constant stimulation keeps the brain bathed in dopamine, not as fulfillment, but as anticipation. Talking, reacting, scrolling, explaining, all serve the same function. They maintain movement. They prevent stillness from revealing unresolved patterns. Silence interrupts this chemical rhythm. Dopamine drops. The mind is no longer pulled forward by novelty. It is forced inward. This is why silence initially feels uncomfortable. The nervous system has learned to associate quiet with deprivation. When stimulation disappears, the brain predicts loss. It searches for input the way an addict searches for relief. This is not a failure of character. It is conditioning. The Stoics described it as being enslaved to externals. Modern science calls it dependency on reward loops. Andrew Huberman explains that when dopamine spikes are frequent and unearned, baseline motivation declines. The mind becomes restless when nothing is happening. Silence becomes intolerable, not because it is empty, but because the brain has forgotten how to rest in neutral. It has learned to equate constant activity with safety. In silence, unresolved thoughts surface, old fears return. Internal narratives grow louder because nothing competes with them. This is why people speak unnecessarily, fill space, or seek noise the moment quiet appears. They are not avoiding silence, they are avoiding themselves. The Stoics anticipated this long before brain scans existed. They taught that discomfort is not a signal to flee, but an invitation to train. Cleanthes believed endurance of inner unease was essential for alignment with reason. What neuroscience now confirms is that sitting with silence gradually recalibrates the brain. Neuroplasticity does not require intensity, it requires consistency. When silence is sustained, the nervous system adapts. The initial agitation fades, the mind stops demanding stimulation. Serotonin begins to stabilize mood, cortisol decreases, the internal environment becomes less volatile. Silence stops feeling like absence and begins to feel like ground. The viewer arrives at a critical realization here. Discomfort in silence is not danger. It is withdrawal. It is the nervous system recalibrating away from dependency. What feels like anxiety is often the absence of habitual noise. Those who endure this phase gain something rare. They recover access to their inner signal without distortion. They begin to hear thoughts before they harden into reactions. They sense emotions before they erupt into behavior. Silence becomes diagnostic. It shows what needs attention without judgment. Once the illusion of threat dissolves, a deeper insight emerges. Those who endure silence gain an advantage others never access. Silence is not only an inner discipline, it is also a form of strategic intelligence. Throughout history, those who understood power knew when to speak and, more importantly, when not to. Words reveal position, silence obscures it. In this asymmetry, leverage is born. When you respond immediately, you surrender tempo. You allow others to set the emotional rhythm. Strategic silence interrupts that rhythm. It creates a pause where expectation collapses. The other person must fill the void, often revealing more than they intended. Cato the Younger was known not for elaborate rhetoric, but for restraint. His silence carried weight because it was deliberate. Psychologically, silence removes reinforcement. Many manipulative behaviors persist only because they receive feedback. Anger seeks reaction. Provocation seeks escalation. When silence meets these attempts, the loop breaks. Without emotional return, the behavior loses momentum. Daniel Goleman describes this as emotional self-regulation, but its effects extend beyond the self. It reshapes the interaction. Neuroscience explains why this works. Emotional contagion requires synchronization. Voices rise together. Tension feeds on response. When one nervous system remains calm, the other is forced to recalibrate. Silence acts as a stabilizing force. It slows the exchange without confrontation. This does not mean silence is avoidance. It is selective engagement. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that not every impression deserved consent. Strategic silence applies this principle externally. Not every comment deserves reply. Not every challenge deserves explanation. When you refuse unnecessary engagement, you conserve energy and clarity. There is also a deeper layer. Silence renders you unreadable. The human brain constantly seeks patterns to predict behavior. When your responses are delayed or withheld, prediction fails. This unpredictability increases perceived authority. It signals self-sufficiency rather than dependence on validation. Many conflicts persist only because someone keeps feeding them with words. Silence starves them. It does not attack. It does not defend. It simply removes fuel. Over time, this changes how others approach you. The tone softens. The pressure diminishes. Boundaries establish themselves without declaration. This section leaves the viewer with a sober realization. Power does not always assert itself. Sometimes it withdraws just enough to reveal the weakness of noise. Yet silence is not merely external. Its most decisive work happens within. Its deepest form shapes perception, identity, and meaning. When silence is sustained long enough, it stops being a tactic and becomes a territory. This is where identity begins to reorganize itself. Without constant narration, without the impulse to explain or justify, the mind is forced to observe rather than perform. In this observation, something subtle but profound occurs. The self stops reacting and starts clarifying. The Stoics understood identity not as a story we tell, but as a pattern we live. Hierocles spoke of concentric circles of concern, all anchored in the self. Silence tightens that center. It removes unnecessary motion. It allows values to surface without distortion. When you stop speaking, you begin listening, not only to the world, but to the structure of your own mind. Modern neuroscience calls this integration. When external input decreases, internal networks reorganize. The default mode network, often associated with rumination, quiets down when silence is paired with awareness rather than avoidance. Neuroplasticity begins its slow, invisible work. Thought patterns soften, emotional spikes flatten. The inner dialogue loses its sharp edges. Joe Dispenza describes this as the mind stepping out of survival and into coherence. The Stoics would simply call it alignment with reason. Different languages, same phenomenon. Silence creates the conditions for this alignment because it removes interference. It strips the mind of noise until only signal remains. In this state, clarity is no longer forced. It emerges. Decisions feel simpler, not because life has become easy, but because perception has become clean. You no longer argue internally with every impulse. Self-talk becomes quieter, more precise. The mind stops narrating every sensation and starts discerning what matters. This is why silence refines identity. It removes excess. It reveals what remains when nothing is performed. What survives silence is essential. What disappears was never foundational. A calm authority develops here, almost unnoticed. You speak less, but when you do, words carry weight because they are no longer compensating for inner noise. Presence replaces explanation. Others sense it before they understand it. From this refined identity, one final truth remains unavoidable. Silence is not an occasional tool, it is a way of being. At a certain point, silence is no longer something you practice, it is something you embody. The disciplined individual does not calculate when to remain silent. Silence has already settled into their posture, their gaze, their timing. It becomes their presence. This is the highest expression of Stoic apatheia, not emotional numbness, but emotional sovereignty. The capacity to feel without being ruled, to observe without being dragged, to stand firm while others rush to fill space with urgency. Musonius Rufus taught that philosophy must be visible in conduct. Here, silence becomes visible without being declared. Neuroscience offers a parallel insight. A regulated nervous system does not seek constant discharge. It does not need to react to prove existence. Emotional intelligence, as Daniel Goleman explains, is not the absence of emotion, but mastery over its expression. When silence becomes embodied, emotional energy no longer spills outward. It circulates inward, strengthening focus, patience, and resolve. Such individuals alter environments without effort. Their calm slows conversations. Their restraint diffuses tension. Their refusal to rush unsettles those addicted to immediacy, not because they dominate, but because they are not dependent. This independence is sensed instinctively. Humans are attuned to stability. We gravitate toward those who are not easily moved. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. When silence governs thought, the soul takes on stillness. This stillness is not fragile, it is unshakable. It does not flinch at provocation or bend under pressure. It allows the world to adjust rather than adjusting itself to the world. At this stage, silence is no longer defensive or strategic. It is natural. Words are used precisely, sparingly, and without emotional leakage. When speech arrives, it is anchored. When silence remains, it speaks louder than explanation ever could. A quiet resolve forms here, deep and unmistakable. Power does not announce itself. It stands firm and lets the world adjust. Finally, understand this. Silence is not something you add to your life. It is something you return to. Beneath every reaction, every explanation, every unnecessary word, silence has always been there, waiting, not as absence but as ground. The Stoics never chased power, they cultivated alignment. They understood that the most dangerous forces are internal and that mastery begins where reaction ends. Modern neuroscience now confirms what they lived. A regulated mind is not louder, it is clearer. A disciplined nervous system does not seek expression at every impulse. It remains, it observes, it chooses. In silence, the mind stops negotiating with chaos. It stops chasing certainty through noise. It settles into what cannot be taken away. This is why silence feels heavy to the untrained and liberating to the disciplined. One experiences it as deprivation. The other experiences it as freedom. Not all power is loud. Some power does not speak. Some power simply remains, and in that remaining, it dominates.